Hey, welcome back to SilverStripe with React. In this video, we're going to be going over actually getting some data from the SilverStripe CMS and rendering that to the front end with React. And we're going to do the base HTML content that comes with the default installation. We're going to start by defining a constructor for our page component here. So that's going to be constructor. It's going to have props. And then we're going to call super props, and the state will be an object. And then our property that we're going to be going over here is content. And we'll just set that to an empty paragraph. So it's going to be paragraph, just like this, just like HTML essentially. Now what we want here is this HTML content that I mentioned here that comes with every page in the editor here. So we're going to go to our page controller in the app directory, source, and here we are, page controller. And we're going to define a new allowed action, and it's just going to be a string, and it's going to be feed viewable data. You can call this whatever you like, but it needs to be the same index that we'll use for our URL handler. Next, we will define the URL handlers. So it's going to be another private static. It's going to be URL handlers. It's going to be another array. And that needs to be the same index. So it's going to be feed viewable data, and it's going to just have the same value just for clarity's sake. And don't forget your semicolon here. Okay, excuse me. Actually, we're going to go ahead and name this fetch, because this is going to be what we use in our fetch request on the front end, and then it's going to use this method that we'll define now. So we'll define this down here, public function, and then that'll be the feed viewable data, and it's going to be an HTTP request, and then we'll need to import this class as well. But just like this, so this action here, the feed viewable data, will use this method that we defined down here, and this URL, this is what we'll use on the front end, and it will hit this method and then feed our viewable data to our React components. Again, we need to import this class here. It's going to be use SilverStripe control HTTP request. Next, we will simply create a viewable data array. And we just want the content for now. So it's going to be content. Move this over. And then we'll set that to the page content. So this page controller still has the same this context as the page. So we can pull the content directly from here, just like this. And then we can return that. And since we're going to be making a fetch request, we want it to be returned as JSON. So we're going to say return JSON encode, and that's going to be our viewable data array, just like this. Okay, so in our top level index.jsx file, we're going to define the fetch viewable data function, and that's going to be asynchronous. So it's going to be fetch viewable data. I think we would want a function here actually. And then we'll just open up a try catch block in here. This is going to have an error that can be passed in, and we'll just console log that. Next, we're going to want to define a new path variable. And this is important for submitting requests through the home page, because you might not have the name of the page in the URL segment. So what we'll do is we'll say that path equals the result of a ternary. So it's going to be document.location.pathname. And if this strictly equals just a slash, then we're going to say this is document.location with home at the end. We would want this rounded in backticks for our ES6 string templating. Alright, otherwise this is going to be just the document.location. Okay, just like this. Next we'll open up our GET request. So this is going to be stored in a response variable. So we'll say const response equals await fetch, and then backticks path, and then fetch viewable data. Okay, and then our second argument would be an object that we can define headers on. We'll say method equals get, and headers will be an object of its own. All right, and we'll say content type equals application/JSON. Okay, we'll get the body of the result with const body equals response.text, and that's a function. And then we'll say the result equals JSON.parse body, and then we'll just return that, just like this. Next we will just pass that as a prop to our component, so it's going to be fetch viewable data equals fetch viewable data, just like this. Next, back in our page component, we can define a new method that will load in the viewable data, so we'll just call that load viewable data. Okay, it's going to be asynchronous, and we can get the data from our prop by saying const data equals await this dot props dot fetch viewable data. Next, we'll just check for some data. And if we have some, we'll go ahead and create a new parsed content variable. So it's going to be parsed content. And for now, we'll just set it to another empty paragraph. So it's going to be P and a closing P. Now we'll check for the actual HTML content that we passed in through the content viewable data index. So we'll say if data.content, and then we're going to want to run a regex search and replace to get images working, because you can upload images through the HTML editor, but whenever we pass that as viewable data to our component, it comes with more of a short code syntax that won't work with our HTML. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. We'll say parsed content equals data.content.replace, and this is going to take our regex pattern in. So it's going to be two of these. We're going to escape some brackets since these square brackets mean something to regex, and we'll say image, and then we're going to open up a capture group, and this is just going to be anything 0 or more times, and then we'll replace this with an image and $1 for our capture group. Alright, and then we'll just go ahead and set the state. So this set state, and it takes an object, and it will be the content. Set that to parse content. All right, and then we'll go ahead and replace this h1 hello world with a new div, and we're going to say dangerously set inner HTML equals a new object. Now this dangerously set inner HTML, it will just import any raw HTML that you pass it in. So it could be dangerous if you're not setting something that you provided directly from your site. So we should be okay because we're passing in whatever HTML that we enter in the CMS, but it's going to take a double underscore HTML property, and we'll just set that to the state's content. Just adjust this to be fully capitalized, so HTML as in an acronym. Next, go ahead and run both an npm run build for your front-end assets and a dev build on your site so that your allowed actions and URL handlers are now working. Okay, so I think we missed one step here. Go ahead and run npm run watch so this runs automatically. But what we want to do is say component did mount, oops, and then say this dot load viewable data. Okay, so this is a lifecycle method in React, and it will call this load viewable data, which will update our state as soon as this component mounts. Okay, one more thing, in your index.jsx, you're just going to want to throw the word await before your response text here. Okay, now back on your front end, you should see almost like a duplication of your site's content right above here. We're going to go ahead and remove this from our template in a future video, but for now we can see that React is rendering content from SilverStripe. So in the next video, we'll just continue on with this. We'll create social links that can be used site-wide and get those rendered through React. So I'll catch you then.